At 58 years old, Daniel Wright had accumulated more wealth than he could possibly spend in 3 lifetimes, but as of last Tuesday, he barely had 3 months. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Dr. Levine had said, her voice gentle but clinical. "I'm so sorry, Daniel." He'd taken the news with the same stoic demeanor that had served him well through 30 years of cutthroat corporate acquisitions. No tears, no bargaining, just a simple nod and a request for his options. There weren't many. Behind him, his attorney, Howard, shuffled papers nervously at the glass table. "Daniel, I must advise against this. It's unorthodox at best, legally complicated at worst." Daniel turned from the view, his tall frame still commanding despite how the cancer had already begun stealing weight from his once robust physique. "You've been my attorney for 25 years, Howard. When have you known me to do anything by the book?" Howard sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Never. But this? Adopting 5 homeless teenagers in your condition? The board will say you've lost your mind. Your cousins are already circling like vultures for your estate." "Let them circle," Daniel said, lowering himself carefully into the chair across from Howard. The pain in his abdomen was getting worse each day. "I've made my decision." "But why? Why now?" Howard's voice was tinged with genuine confusion. "You've funded homeless shelters for years. You could set up a foundation, a trust." "Because I'm tired of writing checks from a distance," Daniel interrupted, his blue eyes intense despite the fatigue etched around them. "I want to make a direct difference in someone's life before I go. Is that so hard to understand?" Howard didn't answer, but his expression said everything. "Yes, it is." The adoption agency had been bewildered by his request, especially given his diagnosis, which he'd disclosed up front. The social workers had exchanged concerned glances when he specified he wanted older boys, teenagers that nobody else wanted, the ones labeled difficult or unadoptable. "With all due respect, Mr. Wright," Ms. Patterson had said, the agency director, "these boys need stability. Given your prognosis, I'm not sure this arrangement would be in their best interest." "I'm dying, not incompetent," Daniel had replied evenly. "I have a fully staffed home, financial resources beyond measure, and connections that could set these boys up for life. Tell me how that's not in their best interest." After weeks of legal wrangling, psychological evaluations, and promises of long-term provisions that would extend well beyond his death, Daniel finally got approval. Howard pulled every string, called in every favor, and somehow made it happen. Not everyone was pleased. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Lawrence Kincaid, Daniel's oldest friend and business partner, demanded over drinks at their private club. Several heads turned at nearby tables. "Taking in 5 street rats when you should be focused on treatment, on fighting this thing?" "Keep your voice down," Daniel said calmly, sipping his sparkling water. He'd already given up alcohol to make what little time he had left more comfortable. "This is a publicity stunt, right?" Lawrence continued, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "Some tax write-off or legacy play? Because if it is, there are cleaner ways." "It's not a stunt, and they're not street rats. They're children who've never had a chance." Lawrence's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "Children? They're teenage boys with rap sheets. What do you think's going to happen when you bring them into your penthouse? They'll rob you blind and be gone before the week is out."
Daniel had simply smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll surprise us both." The day Daniel brought them home was unseasonably cold for October. 5 boys, aged 14 to 17, stood awkwardly in his expansive living room, clutching small bags containing their meager possessions, their eyes darting suspiciously around the luxury that surrounded them. "Welcome home," Daniel said simply. Marcus, the oldest at 17, stepped forward. Tall and wiry, with deep brown skin and guarded eyes, he'd been in the system since he was 10. His file reported 3 failed foster placements and a history of defiance. "Why us?" he asked bluntly. "What's your angle?" The other boys tensed, as if expecting Marcus's directness to cost them this unexpected opportunity. Daniel didn't flinch. "Fair question. I'm dying. Cancer. 3 months, give or take." The boys exchanged stunned glances. "I have more money than I need, and no children of my own. You need someone to give you a foundation, resources, and opportunities. It seemed like a good match." So we're like a charity project? This from Elijah, 16, whose file noted a tendency toward explosive anger, but whose eyes betrayed a sharp intelligence. No, Daniel said firmly. You're my family now, for however long I have left. Tyler, the youngest, at 14, frowned. He was small for his age, with a mop of auburn hair and a scattering of freckles across his pale face. But why would you want to spend your last months with strangers? Daniel looked at each of them in turn. Marcus, defiant but protective. Elijah, brilliant but wounded. James, 16, quiet and watchful. And Antonio, 15, whose smile didn't reach his wary eyes. Because, Daniel said finally, I've spent too many years surrounded by people who only wanted what I could give them. I thought it might be nice to spend my last days with people who haven't yet decided who I am. The first weeks were awkward, tense, filled with missteps and misunderstandings. The boys moved through the penthouse like ghosts, afraid to touch anything, speak too loudly, or fully unpack their bags, as if to be sent back at any moment. Daniel tried to give them space while establishing routines. Meals were to be eaten together. A tutor came daily to help them catch up on schoolwork. They each had their own bedroom, the first private space many of them had ever had. It was during their third dinner together that the ice finally began to crack. "You're not eating," Marcus observed, watching as Daniel pushed his food around his plate. Daniel looked up, surprised by the concern in the boy's voice. "The medication affects my appetite." "My mom had cancer," James said suddenly. It was the most words he'd strung together since arriving. Before she died, she couldn't eat much either. A heavy silence fell over the table. "My abuela used to make arroz con pollo when anyone was sick. She said it could cure anything." Antonio offered hesitantly. Daniel smiled. "I'd like to try that sometime." Antonio's eyes lit up. "For real? I could make it. I remember how." "We'll get whatever ingredients you need," Daniel promised. The next evening, Antonio commandeered the kitchen with a confidence they hadn't seen before. The other boys gradually drifted in to help, Tyler setting the table, Marcus chopping vegetables, Elijah reading recipe instructions, James quietly washing dishes as they went. Daniel sat at the kitchen island, watching this impromptu collaboration with a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with his illness. When they finally gathered around the table, Antonio placed a bowl of fragrant rice and chicken before Daniel with a nervous smile. "It's probably not as good as my abuela's." Daniel took a small bite, and though his taste buds had been dulled by chemotherapy, he could still appreciate the rich flavors and the care that had gone into preparing the meal. "It's perfect," he said sincerely. For the first time, they ate without the weight of awkward silence. Instead, Antonio shared stories about his grandmother, which prompted Tyler to talk about the librarian who used to save books for him when he was younger. Slowly, cautiously, walls began to lower. Lawrence visited 2 weeks after the boys had moved in, ostensibly to discuss business matters, but really to assess the situation. He arrived unannounced, brushing past Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, with barely a greeting. He found Daniel in the study with Elijah, helping him work through an algebra problem. "I need to speak with you," Lawrence said, eyeing Elijah with undisguised suspicion. "Privately." Daniel eased himself into a leather chair, not bothering to deny it. The cancer was progressing faster than expected. "What's so urgent that you couldn't call first?" "The board is concerned. Rumors are circulating about your domestic situation," Lawrence said. "People are saying you've lost your judgment, that grief or medication have affected your decision-making. And you believe them?" Lawrence sighed, his expression softening slightly. "I believe you're a good man making a questionable choice at a vulnerable time." "Daniel, what happens to these boys when you're gone? Have you thought that through?" "Of course I have," Daniel replied, irritation creeping into his voice. "Everything's arranged. The penthouse will be theirs until they're all of age. Trust funds are established for education. Howard has all the paperwork." "And who manages them? Who raises them?" Lawrence pressed.
Before Daniel could answer, there was a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, then the sound of something shattering. Lawrence's expression turned smug. Ah, there we go. The chaos begins. Daniel rose painfully and made his way to the door, Lawrence following close behind. In the hallway, they found Marcus and Tyler facing off against a red-faced James, while Antonio knelt, picking up pieces of a broken vase. "He was going through your stuff," James shouted, pointing at Marcus. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I wasn't stealing anything." "What were you doing then?" Lawrence interjected coldly. 5 heads swiveled toward the adults. Tyler instinctively moved closer to Marcus. "I asked him to bring me my medication," Daniel said calmly. "I left it in my desk drawer." Lawrence scoffed. "And you just happened to arrive in time to witness this altercation. How convenient." Daniel felt a flash of anger, but before he could respond, Elijah appeared from around the corner. "Actually," he said, holding up his phone, "I recorded the whole thing. We installed an app that connects to the penthouse security system. Marcus has been helping Mr. Daniel when the pain is bad."
Lawrence stared at the footage, then at the boys' unified front, clearly taken aback. "I think you should leave now," Daniel said quietly. After Lawrence had gone, Daniel turned to the boys. "You installed security monitoring on your phones?" Marcus looked defensive. "You said this place was ours too. We wanted to make sure it stayed safe." Daniel felt a strange mixture of pride and amusement. Fair enough. But maybe run software installations by me next time. "Are we in trouble?" Tyler asked anxiously. Daniel surveyed the group, Antonio still carefully gathering broken ceramic, James looking ashamed of his outburst, Marcus protective, Tyler nervous, and Elijah standing tall with his technological solution. "No," he said finally, "but we do need to work on communication, and maybe keep breakables to a minimum." A tentative smile broke across Tyler's face. "Does that mean we can redecorate?" As October turned to November, Daniel's health deteriorated more rapidly than expected. There were more bad days than good, more hours spent in bed than up and about. But strangely, as his body weakened, his home came alive in ways it never had before. The boys, who had first tiptoed around in fearful silence, now filled the spaces with their distinct personalities. Tyler's art talent emerged when Daniel gave him permission to paint a mural in the hallway. Elijah's technical abilities flourished with access to proper equipment. Antonio started cooking regularly, treasured family recipes becoming household favorites. James, the quietest, revealed a gift for music when Daniel noticed him lingering near the untouched grand piano. After some encouragement and arranged lessons, haunting melodies began to fill the penthouse in the evenings. And Marcus, initially the most resistant, proved to be a natural leader and surprisingly an attentive caregiver as Daniel's condition worsened. It was Marcus who organized the medication schedule. Marcus who helped Daniel to the bathroom when pride would have had him crawling. Marcus who sat up with him through nights when pain made sleep impossible. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel asked him during one such night, when the city lights glimmered like stars beyond the window and pain had reduced his world to shallow breaths. Marcus, sitting in the chair beside the bed, shrugged uncomfortably. "Someone has to." "The hospice nurse starts next week," Daniel reminded him. "You don't have to take this on." Marcus was quiet for so long that Daniel thought he might not answer. Then, barely audible, "My mom died alone, in a shelter bathroom. No one helped her." Daniel reached out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Marcus took it. "I'm not alone. Thanks to you." By Thanksgiving, Daniel was confined mostly to his bed or a wheelchair. The doctors had revised their estimate. Weeks, not months. "We should still do Thanksgiving," he insisted when Marcus suggested canceling. "It's our first as a family." And so they did, moving the celebration to Daniel's bedroom, setting up a table where he could see everyone from his bed. Antonio and Mrs. Winters prepared a feast. Tyler decorated the room with paper turkeys and handwritten notes of gratitude. "This is ridiculous," Daniel said, but his eyes shone with unshed tears as he looked around at the makeshift holiday scene. "Well, so is adopting 5 random kids when you're dying, but here we are," Elijah retorted, with the blunt humor that had become his trademark. They all laughed, including Daniel, though it turned into a painful cough that Marcus helped him through. When the food was ready, James surprised everyone by suggesting they share what they were thankful for. "I know it's cheesy," he said defensively, "but I've never had a real Thanksgiving before." One by one, they offered their gratitude. Tyler for his own room and art supplies, Antonio for a kitchen where nothing was off limits, Elijah for the computer setup that doesn't totally suck, James, shyly, for the piano lessons. When it was Marcus's turn, he looked directly at Daniel. "I'm thankful you didn't listen to everyone who said this was a stupid idea." Daniel smiled weakly. "I'm thankful none of you has stolen my silverware. Yet?" That got another laugh, though everyone in the room knew that any valuable items had long ceased to matter to Daniel or to the boys, who had discovered that security meant more than possessions. After dinner, when the younger boys had cleared the dishes and moved to the living room to watch a movie, Marcus stayed behind. "We know you've been talking to Mrs. Winters and that social worker about after," he said awkwardly. "We hear things." Daniel nodded tiredly. "I want to make sure you're all taken care of." "We've been talking too," Marcus continued. "The 5 of us. We want to stay together. Here." "That's the plan," Daniel assured him. "Howard has arranged everything." Marcus hesitated. "But we need someone, an adult, legally. We were thinking maybe Mrs. Winters. She said she'd consider it if you approved." Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't even realized was there. Mrs. Winters, his housekeeper of 15 years, was the closest thing to family he'd had before the boys. She was in her 50s, no nonsense but kind, and she'd taken to the boys with surprising affection. "I think that's a perfect solution," he said. "I'll talk to Howard tomorrow." Daniel didn't make it to Christmas. He died peacefully in the early morning of December 15th, with all 5 boys and Mrs. Winters keeping vigil around his bed. His last conscious act was to squeeze Marcus's hand as the boy read aloud from a dog-eared copy of The Old Man and the Sea, a book they'd discovered they both loved. The funeral was small but dignified, attended by business associates who still looked askance at the 5 teenagers in the front row, but who no longer dared to comment openly on Daniel's eccentric final act. Howard read the will, which left everything meticulously arranged: the penthouse in trust for the boys until the youngest turned 25, generous educational funds, investments set aside for future businesses or endeavors, and provisions for Mrs. Winters to become their legal guardian with a substantial salary increase. Lawrence approached the boys afterwards, his expression difficult to read. "I misjudged the situation. Him. And you," he said stiffly. Marcus, now the de facto leader of their unlikely family, simply nodded. Most people did. 5 years later. The penthouse had considerably changed. Tyler's artwork covered the once pristine walls. The formal dining room had been converted into a music studio, where James, now attending Berklee College of Music, practiced with his band. The guest suite had become Elijah's tech hub, where he ran the app development company he'd started in his senior year of high school. Antonio, studying culinary arts, had completely remodeled the kitchen, and Marcus had transformed Daniel's office into a community outreach center where he coordinated the foundation they'd established in Daniel's name, a foundation specifically focused on helping teens aging out of the foster care system. Mrs. Winters still lived with them, though she'd long since transitioned from guardian to friend as they'd grown into young adults. "Did you see this?" Elijah asked one such evening, sliding his tablet across the table to show an article from the Boston Globe. The headline read, "Right Boys Foundation opens 5th Youth Center, continues legacy of controversial adoption." "They're still using that word," Marcus noted with a shake of his head. "Controversial." "Well, it was," Mrs. Winters said factually, passing the mashed potatoes. "People talked for months, said he'd lost his mind, said you'd rob him blind or worse. Instead, we just became successful, productive citizens," Elijah said with mocked horror. They all laughed, including Daniel, though it turned into a painful cough that Marcus helped him through.
Tyler, his hair now styled in an artistic undercut that would have made teenage him gasp, grinned. Remember Lawrence's face when Marcus graduated valedictorian? I thought the man was going to swallow his tongue. They all laughed at the memory. Lawrence had eventually become an unlikely ally, his initial skepticism giving way to reluctant respect and finally to genuine support as he watched the transformation of 5 street rats into the young men Daniel had somehow seen from the beginning. Speaking of Lawrence, Marcus said, he called today. The company board is still interested in that mentorship program we proposed. James, who spoke more these days but was still the quietest among them, looked up from his plate. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he hadn't adopted us? A thoughtful silence fell over the table. I'd probably be dead or in jail, Elijah said bluntly. I'd still be bouncing between foster homes, Tyler added softly. Antonio nodded. Same. Marcus considered the question carefully. I think about it sometimes, he admitted. But then I remember something Daniel told me that last week, when he could barely speak anymore. The others looked at him expectantly. Marcus rarely shared conversations from those final days. He said, everyone thought I was giving you boys a second chance, but you gave me a first chance at having a family. Mrs. Winters dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. That sounds like him. James raised his water glass. To Daniel, Marcus corrected gently, raising his own glass. One by one, the others joined the toast. To Dad. On the outside, snow began to fall softly on the Boston skyline, just as it had 5 years ago, when 5 suspicious, damaged boys had reluctantly followed a dying millionaire into a penthouse that would become their home. They had all been broken in different ways. Daniel by illness and isolation, the boys by neglect and abandonment, but together, somehow, they had made each other whole. Sometimes, the things that seem most foolish to the outside world are the ones that save us in the end. Dear listener, that's the end of Daniel Wright's story. What lessons did you take away? Share your thoughts and let us know if you want more stories like this. Thanks for joining us, and stay kind.